This is the Illuminate podcast, a Sandy Boy production. Each week on the Illuminate podcast, the hosts will bring you insightful conversations and stories of people who are illuminating their own lives through their business, work, community, family, and world. Hello and welcome to the Illuminate podcast. I am your host, Emma Benner, and today I am sharing episode 71 with Farah Nanji. Farah is a DJ, journalist, TEDx speaker, podcast host, and the founder of Regents Racing. As a teenager, Farah was diagnosed with dyspraxia, which is a developmental coordination disorder that affects 5% of the world's population. And in this episode, Farah shares about how she has never settled and allowed dyspraxia to be a weakness of hers as she has gone on to be an entrepreneur in two industries that rely heavily on motor coordination, which are music and motorsport. Farah's business, Regents Racing, is a business that explores leadership lessons from Formula One racing, and she recently launched her podcast, Mission Makers, which is where she interviews people that are involved in music, motorsport, business, and other industries. And in this episode, we get to hear about all that Farah does with her DJ career, her TEDx talk. I really loved hearing about the process of doing that speech and how she launched her podcast and, of course, her business, Regents Racing. We also hear a lot about her experience with dyspraxia growing up and how that's affected her, and some of the things that she wants to tell other people that are experiencing similar things. This episode is so much fun, and I love chatting with Farah. But before we get started on this episode, I do want to share about the company Finley's. Finley's is a really cool pet treat company where they have so many fun flavors for your pets to try, but they also give 50% of their profits to initiatives that provide employment training, accessibility, health and wellness, and advocacy platforms for people with disabilities. I really hope you check them out, and if you do, make sure to use code Illuminate20 to get 20% off your order at getfinleys.com. All right, let's get started with my conversation with Farah Nanji. All right, today on the Illuminate podcast, we have Farah Nanji. Welcome to the show, Farah.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
Yeah, so you've done a TED Talk before, so an interview like this must feel like so much less pressure.
It is funny without having that stage. I think the stages and the red dot and just the knowing that it's on that platform just sort of it scares you a little bit. But yeah, no, I love podcasts and having conversations. So. Hopefully we can have a great conversation today.
Yeah, I want to dive in later in the conversation about the TED Talks. I'm really interested about that process. But first, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background to who you are?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Farah. I am I was born in London in the UK. My roots are from East Africa, India, and Pakistan. So a bit of a diverse background. And I suppose what I do as my professions are also pretty unique in themselves. I'd say I'm split between. Sorry about that. I say I'm split between three industries: music as a DJ, music producer, motorsport as a founder of a couple of businesses in the motorsports industry, exploring sort of leadership lessons from things like Formula One. And then as a journalist, sort of writing about it and just kind of sharing a lot of interesting content. And really all of those three things, they came together at different parts of my life, but most importantly, music and motorsport came around sort of at the same time and at a very young age. And many years later, it kind of led me towards basically making a career out of something I absolutely love.
Yeah, so your TED Talk is a lot of talking about your diagnosis of dyspraxia and how that has played out in your own life. Do you want to share more about what that specifically is?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of times, people sometimes when they hear that word, they think that they mishear and they think that you mean dyslexic, because a lot of people know what dyslexia is. So sometimes people don't realize that it's actually a completely separate thing, but it is like a sort of learning difficulty, and what it is it's a sort of difficulty with processing motor coordination in your brain. So it's actually sending like a delayed signal to the rest of your body. So that affects things like even simple things like using a knife and fork, or cutting with a scissor, or throwing a ball, and also things like sequencing. So subjects like maths can be quite difficult. And actually it actually affects, about, they say about 5% of the world's population. So that's actually, that's not a small number. And it's kind of like sometimes it's a bit of a hidden thing. Like people just think that they are generally bad at maths, or they're clumsy, and things like that, but there could actually be an underlying reason for it. And so that's yeah, I got diagnosed with that when I was about 15, and ever since then I've been confronting that head on and just trying to get better with things like my balance and coordination and things.
What does the journey to being diagnosed look like? Like, what is the process you go through to get that diagnosis at age 15?
That's a really good question. So I'm 30 now, and of course the education system in the UK was very different, 15 years ago. And I was in a really good school, and they didn't detect like anything was wrong with me, even when the signs were like glaringly obvious, even at like the age of like 4 or 5. And it's really interesting because my parents, their family business is in Montessori education, and we have 2 schools, and we can actually really, really see like just how evident difficulties in learning things can be in a child, and how it can easily show itself from literally the age of like 3. So it kind of didn't go detected for a really long time, and basically because I was in this kind of highly pressurized school, that my teachers sort of thought maybe I was being a rebel, maybe I was trying to be difficult because I would be excelling in certain subjects, particularly creative, expressive subjects like English, and those kinds of things, and history. But then when it came to things like chemistry, biology, math, science, I just couldn't. The level was completely different, and so they thought, I'm doing that to be difficult and things like that. So it was almost out of like, I don't want to use the word pity, but it kind of was like, oh, well, maybe you could just get some extra time, maybe it will, you might want to see if it might help you. And so they just suggested, like go to an educational psychologist to see if you can get any extra time. They didn't actually think that, like, they didn't have any idea that like it was a certain thing. Like they didn't know that. And I just went to the educational psychologist, and literally my diagnosis was there, and I never really did anything. I didn't see anyone after that. It was like, I went to this exam. She worked with me for a whole day, and she saw simple things like, how can you draw a line? How straight do you draw a line? And every time you draw a line straight, if it's not like, there are like certain sort of degrees off by which you can tell if somebody has a problem. So that was kind of the diagnosis. And then and then that was it. There wasn't really any sort of like help after that, because it is quite expensive. You do have to spend quite a few hundred dollars to go, and then obviously think about what's the therapy, and so that was the journey towards getting diagnosed.
When you get a diagnosis like that for something like that, was it a relief? Did you feel understood? Like, what was the overall feeling when you heard that diagnosis at first?
I mean, I was really in my shell at that age. I was really introverted, so I almost felt, I don't know, I felt like sort of annoyed that I had this. But then over the years, I realized that like, that actually, I can completely take a hold of this, particularly because I had already started go-karting, and that's where I felt very confused and angry, because basically, like, I knew that within me I was capable of driving really well, because like I was getting, I was getting on podiums in some races. And you can't have a motor coordination delay difficulty and then get on a podium. I mean, there has to be a way that you're doing something that you know that you're doing something that's different, that's able to like to take your like just able to kind of overcome it a little bit. So I felt angry in the beginning because I felt like, I mean, coordination, I mean, and all these things, I mean, they're linked to so many career paths. So, and particularly at that point, I wanted motorsport to be my career path as a driver, and I felt really annoyed that I probably am definitely not going to have a chance of getting into Formula One. There's just no way, and so yeah. But then over the years, because I decided I'm not going to stop, racing, because I knew I wasn't a danger, I wasn't a liability to anybody on the track. I mean, I was a good driver, but I realized that what I was stalling at was maybe more the advanced learning, and that's where it took me a lot longer to study things like racing lines, understand the different techniques. And I think that by doing those things, like actually confronting it and just trying to study, like me and my parents always laugh at home because I took maths as an AS level subject, which is like a very much more sort of advanced thing you do when you're 16, 17 in the UK. And I failed miserably at it, but actually what it taught me was just a lot more understanding about those things. So I think just those earlier on sort of boldness to just kind of still be there and still do those things gave me more of a foundation to it not affect my life as much as it may have done if I just ignored it. If I just said, well, that's it then, I'm not gonna do, but you can't escape doing maths. I mean, you've got it's a core subject, and you want to get an A or a B, at worst in this school. So, yeah.
So one of the things that I pulled from your TED Talk was when you talked about you didn't feel understood by your peers, the other students, and the teachers. It just felt like when you were going through school, people didn't understand where you were coming from. So I'm curious, if you look back, what do you think that teachers could have done differently, or a school in general could implement to help other students that are facing something like you did, to help them feel heard, feel understood, and maybe progress as well?
I mean, that's a great question, and that could literally be a podcast on itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the education system is clearly flawed, and not just here in the UK, but
everywhere,
globally.
Right?
Everywhere, and kids do feel misunderstood, and then there's so much bullying that's prevalent, and that can have such a deep psychological impact on people's lives. And I think that in this school where I was, it was this top 10 school in the country. So, you had to be pretty smart to get in. And I just kind of felt like it was a fluke that I got in, because two of my cousins were at that school, and they went on to become, head girl, and they went on to go to Oxford and all of this. So in a way, I thought maybe it was a fluke I got in. But actually, I think in that particular school, I think, creativity just wasn't encouraged. It was like obsessive performance towards academic subjects, and that's it. So you're not encouraged, to kind of to learn about healing through music, to learn about the importance of nature. Yeah, you have sports, you do sports, but were we really going to forests? Were we really learning how to be empathetic? Were we really those are so important things? And were we really talking about consciousness? Were we kind of what was I going to say? There was just so many things they could have done better. I think the bullying particularly was something they never took a ownership of. It was like, well, it just happens in school, and even we don't. There's not enough consequences there, and there are situations that enable people to thrive in those environments, which is really, really wrong. And those things, they need to change. But as I sort of mentioned, working, my family kind of running this Montessori method school. The method towards Montessori is absolutely phenomenal, because you realize that 0 to 3, your brain is literally forming 80 to 90% of its foundation, and everything that you learn in those fundamental early years will literally form how you become as a person, how you interact with rejection, how you how you feel when you're not heard, or how you express yourself, and if you're, what you're exposed to in that environment, from your parents to your guardians, how you're treated, and it takes so long to kind of correct those things if those things are not nurtured from a young age. And what Montessori really does is it almost it observes how a child is actually naturally gravitating towards a particular activity, and that activity will have a sensorial outcome, it will have a coordination outcome, it will have all these different things. But you can really see like whether a child is actually having difficulty, and that exposes where there needs to be more work done. And that Montessori method, it even exists up till the age of 18 in some schools. And I think that in the UK, and yeah, particularly for the UK, because that's obviously my experience, is just everything is so put into boxes, and you just have to tick these boxes to go through, and those real life skills are not necessarily relayed, and you have to go and figure it out for yourself. And yeah, I think those are my kind of early thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, there's so many things you could dive into and how to make it change, but I really like your point on how if they don't do something with bullying or helping you along, you could have just given up, but you talked about earlier how you dove into things that may have been challenging and tried to figure out a way to do them. So that I really want to talk about the Formula One racing. I'm going to be honest, I know nothing about it. So I'm really curious about your experience. Have you raced professionally? Or I really don't know anything about it. So I don't know if there's like semi-professional or just like amateur races. How does that all work, and what's your involvement in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, motorsport in general is kind of like, it has a similar sort of, let's say, it has a similar sort of approach in all different parts of the world. So, you could go drifting, you could go rallying, you could go go-karting, you could do single seaters. You could do like a Porsche Cup sort of race, for example. You could get your own car and start competing against other cars in similar categories. Um, of course, the pinnacle of motorsport is Formula One, and that's for many reasons. One is the engineering perspective. Some of the technologies that we see on the road today, like even things like carbon fiber, they come from Formula One. These teams are spending upwards of 150 million pounds a season to develop two cars. So the breakthroughs they have is absolutely phenomenal. And there's even this kind of crazy thing that the sort of the worst performing car at a race, by the time it gets to the next race 2 weeks later, will be very close, to what sort of the mid pack would have been in that previous race, because like every single minute of the day, there's improvements happening in R&D and performance. So that's kind of Formula One. But to get into Formula One is, it's not a joke. There are only 20 seats. And those guys are pretty much, devoting their life to this since literally from even the age of 4 or 5, because the path towards racing starts, I think, universally, like from basically doing go-karting, because that's what you can kind of do at that age. And then what happens is sort of around, you could also do like a bit of, kind of motorbikes as well. But in my particular sort of interest, I think around the age of like sort of 14, you can start kind of getting into single seaters. So you kind of step out of a cart and you go into a closed, a real car sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I do race. I mean, like, I'm really lucky to run these two companies, which one is focused around events and really around taking really interesting events, like even things like driving blindfolded with Land Rover, for example, and getting to, kind of experience the British countryside and kind of going on really steep terrains and going in deep waters and things like that. And I get to, kind of put those ideas on and bring them to life as an experience for my clients. And then, we also do things like the drifting school. We could learn from like some stunt drivers who were a part of Fast and Furious. So there's so many things you could do with motor racing. Like there's so many different, types of racing, which is why like living in the UK is amazing because you have like 6 or 7 Formula One teams who are in the UK. You have so many manufacturers, and automotive companies that are based here. So like this experience with Land Rover, I mean, Land Rover has like 20 or 30 sites in the UK that they use across the country, to run experiences like this with like so much open land. So yeah, that's kind of my foray into it. And I also kind of captain a karting team as well. So I'm always learning about, and coaching young drivers, particularly in the earlier sort of parts of their journeys.
How did you initially get into it?
It's a good question. I think my grandfather, he loved cars. He was watching Formula One. He did have a really nice classic car himself. And it was our Sunday sort of bonding thing. Like I would kind of just go in his car, and even my parents, they laugh, like, the only way to get you to sleep when you were like a baby was like for us to take you for like long drives. That's literally the only way you'd stop crying and like go to sleep. And I think like I just always gravitated towards cars. Something about it just fascinated me. Like I loved the adrenaline, I love the thrill, I love the beauty of a car, the how it made you feel, the aesthetic. And then, of course, the history, learning more about it when I was growing up, the history behind these cars and like the people, what it was like, 50 to 100 years ago. People died in races. I mean, you'd have Formula One races where it was a regular thing. People just died in a race, and you continued on racing. Whereas
From
obviously today, that's a
crashes?
very rare. Yeah, from crashes. Yeah. The safety element, it wasn't something that improved radically until the death of Ayrton Senna. And that's when things changed a lot. But you look back at some of the footage, and it's phenomenal. It was really the most bold and courageous sport. So I kind of just, I loved it. It's not a sport that, you can just, it's not like picking up a ball and let's just go and kick a football in the garden. I mean, you have to want to try and figure out how you can get access to it beyond seeing it on the screen. And for me, that was realizing that karting was something you could do. I went to someone's birthday party. It was a go karting birthday party, and that's when it clicked for me. And I was like, this is just the most amazing thing in the world. I had this mind body experience, and I never felt. I actually think that was like the day I got into consciousness. Like I suddenly realized where I was and things. And I was quite. I mean, I wasn't like 4 or 5, but I was just I was around the age of 11. And I unfortunately been bullied and stuff. So when I got into that cart, it was just you just put your helmet on, nobody knows who you are. It's just
Yeah.
it's just you and that one experience, and going faster and pushing your limits and taking risks. Yeah, and that's how I got into it.
Yeah, interesting. So now you've kind of created a career around it and you've created Regents Racing. What is that all about? What do you currently do with that?
Absolutely. So, I knew that, like, especially when I got the diagnosis of dyspraxia, like, Formula One's just not an achievable dream. I mean, you also need to have a lot of money. Like, just a season in F3, F2 is like £500,000 at the age of like 14, 15.
Mm,
It's just not, accessible for most people.
right. Wow.
So, that's nuts, right? So it is an expensive sport. Obviously, when you talk about things that are a bit less, like karting and just doing a track day, we're not talking hundreds and thousands of pounds. So it's a bit more accessible. But yeah, what does Regents Racing do? So what I sort of saw, what I kind of saw, like what I started observing from a young age was really the leadership lessons that come from motorsport, because in essence, people who devote their life to motorsport and who go on to become, F1 drivers or whatever they are, they start really young, and they have to be really mature, and they have to develop a very mature approach to how they lead other people around them and how they manage their own emotions. The youngest driver on the grid could be like 17 or 18 in Formula One. Um, and if he has a crash, let's say his front wing gets damaged, which can happen quite a lot. I mean, that's £250,000 just wiped off, like one wing. You know, I mean, you're responsible for that. You've got to, you know, answer your sponsors. You've got to answer your team principal. You know, there's so many things, and I just observed this approach to leadership, particularly from like the millennials, and like how things were changing, particularly with technology. And I found it fascinating. And I went to business school during you know, sort of my university years, and I was lucky enough that a few of my friends there were actually race car drivers, and they were competing for companies like Lamborghini, and they were competing in the Dakar Rally and things like that. And I saw this opportunity to like sort of set up a motorsport society, because it didn't exist at the time at that university. And it exploded in its time there. We got to 800 members, and in a way, I was kind of approaching it. It wasn't just let's just go on a track. It was like, let's take the concept of motorsport and let's make it really interesting. Like, let's, like, for example, go to a museum where you have like all these amazing cars, and let's make an incredible you know, sort of fine dining experience out of it, and get a DJ from Buddha Bar, and you know, and then this kind of ambience is created, and it was a very different thing. And I just found myself just like becoming like such a, like, I don't know, creative with looking at motorsport in a different way, perhaps because I had to look at motorsport in a different way if I wanted to be in that world. I mean, of course, we were doing road trips and track days as well, but it was, you know, really trying to find different angles, and the idea just kind of got picked up really well, and people loved it. And later on, it became something that I didn't want to just leave. I didn't want to just stop at university from that. And I was really lucky enough 2 years ago to start it as a business, and really to explore some of those lessons, because the business lessons you can learn from motorsport, I mean, they can literally be transferred into like any company, any industry, any human being. They're all universal principles. That, you know, they're things from communication, managing risk, thinking about sustainability, digital transformation. I mean, there are so many core sort of themes and commonalities that people can relate to, and so that's that. So that's kind of what Regents Racing is, and it's really for a community of people that, you know, did go to that university. We still work with that university as well, particularly because they have like some really interesting young leaders that are being, you know, sort of nurtured into being tomorrow's kind of global leaders. But then we also connect them to people outside of the university who are like successful entrepreneurs. So it's kind of like we have people at our events who are like from all different ages, from Gen X, Y, and Z, which is also really interesting. And then I sort of started a second company recently, which is it hasn't been, it's a startup at the moment. We haven't started like kind of operating fully yet, but it was to go deeper with that idea. So Regents Racing serves like kind of, you know, members and individuals, but the Formula Mind is all about taking those concepts that I touched upon about communication and those workshops, but actually delivering them to companies and senior teams.
What's this new company called?
It's called the Formula Mind.
Okay, cool. So it has the same focus, and it's just with a different age range and everything?
Yeah, it's got the same underlying principles, but it goes a little deeper. It's more of a consultancy. You know, Regents Racing is more of like, you know, you experience the event once. We'll do like 7 experiences or events a year. But for Formula Mind is, you know, is really like a 3 or 4 month consultancy process for a company. So we can really have a bit more of an impact than a one-day experience.
Interesting. What an interesting concept. So is Formula One racing in Europe, is it a very common sport? Can you do it in high school, in university? Like, is it a club sport type thing? Because I just don't feel like that's the way it is around here.
It's a great question. I mean, if you want to get into Formula One, you move to the UK. You know,
Okay.
you've got all these drivers, even from South Africa, from all different parts of the world, even America. You know, who come and they know that the home is here, and that's really because we have, as you know, six or seven of these F1 factories. So the teams are based here. Some of the manufacturers are based here, and then of course, you know, Europe is so close that, you know, in 1 hour or 2 hours you can be in Germany, you could be, you know, in different parts of Europe where they also have, you know, phenomenal automotive and motorsport companies. Is it a school thing? Not really. I mean, as I said, it's not like you go to school and you get a given, do you want to play netball, basketball, hockey, football? You don't get that option of karting. It's not
Okay,
it's not
yeah.
it's not there, right? You kind of have to figure that out for yourself, and that's also a sad thing, but it's because it is still expensive. I mean, to go for a karting race, I mean, it's football is almost a free sport. You just buy a ball and you go to
Yeah.
a field. But karting is, you do have to spend sort of between £40 to £50 a session to go, even up to £100 a session to go, and do it. So it is a bit more inaccessible in that sense.
I guess I didn't catch this. In your company, Regents Racing, does it make it more affordable?
To be honest, I mean, it's not extortionate, but it isn't. It's not. You can't completely eliminate the barriers. I mean, the costs are there to operate. Like,
Right.
you've got to pay the suppliers. You've got to. There's a lot of risk. I mean, that's obviously a huge element of it. So there's a
Yeah.
lot more. There's a lot of organization that has to. You need a lot of people on the ground. So there are a lot of variables around it. But also, just going back to what you were asking about, university. In university, it's a little bit more of a, let's say, exposure, because
Mm-hmm.
engineering is something that we have phenomenal business schools. I'm sorry, not business schools. We have phenomenal universities like Imperial, Oxford Brookes, that have world class engineering departments. And to be honest, like, all of these universities have some sort of a motorsport or automotive, or particularly an engineering society. So those kind of societies, they do organize. They'll try and organize, like, things like a karting day out, or a visit to a factory or something like this.
Interesting. It's such a different world. Like, I really know nothing about the sport or anything about it in general. So it's just interesting to hear more about it and that you have a big involvement. From what I know, it seems like it's a pretty male dominated area. Is that kind of what you see in your experience as well? Are you one of the only females doing it, or are there more that we just don't see?
Absolutely, it is a male dominated sport. There's no doubt about that. I think in the last couple of years there's been huge efforts to get more and more females into it. But if we understand that karting is the beginning, the early the first steps you need to make to that career path, and then you understand there are only 20 seats at the top, and you need millions of dollars to be at the top. So you've got the first barrier, which is a lot of money. Then you've got the second thing, that there's only 20 seats. And then if you think about the fact that they all have to come, from the funnel of karting, the statistic is that I think only 8% of people who are go-karting at a competitive level, at that age, are female. So the numbers are just stacked against you. I mean, they are really, really stacked. However, there have been people slightly one more generation above me, and even well before me. I mean, there were females, racing. It's not a new concept. You can go back 80 years. People were. You can find information about drivers that were actually doing that. But in the last decade or so, there have been a couple of really important figures in the world of Formula One that have championed female involvement, and they've really paved the way for others. And a particular woman is called Susie Wolff, and she was a developmental driver for the Williams F1 team. So that meant that her job was kind of, she was in an F1 team. She was contracted by an F1 team, and she was contributing towards the development of the car. So wind tunnel testing, a lot of sim driving, taking the car on the track, but not at a race. And even just getting to that point is it's a huge achievement. And when she retired, she set up a company called Dare to Be Different that recently got acquired by the FIA, which are the sort of governing body of motorsport here in the UK. And that company was all around, basically going to schools and introducing the concept of motorsport at a very, very young age and a grassroots level, but also working with, like, kids who are like 12, 13, 14, 15, and even a bit older than that, because they also might want to get involved in a career path that they may never have known would have been a career path. Like, you've got the typical obvious ones like marketing and, engineering and all that stuff. But then you've also got, like, really specific things like tire management, or painting a specific component, developing a steering wheel. And what she does is amazing. I think she's already impacted 30,000 school children, and they've gone to these schools and they've bought sort of females that are in Formula One teams behind the scenes, because in one F1 team there are about 800 to 1,000 employees. And she'll get some of the women that are in them, and they'll have the most niche careers within that section, within that team. And they'll come in and they'll speak, and then they'll do activities. And I mean, in my day, and I'm sure even in for you as well, like, would you have ever had that exposure at school to say that, the lady who designed Lewis Hamilton's steering wheel, I just touched it, and I just saw it, and I just had her journey, and that's phenomenal. So she's really, done an incredible job. And then recently there's been a series specifically just for women, and there's almost a sort of counter argument where, do we really need something that's just a series just for women? And unfortunately, because we're not quite there yet, where an F1 driver is not on the grid who's a female, we do need that. We do need that series to be there. And the lady who started that, Catherine, she said, I hope this business isn't going to be around in 10 years' time, because there hopefully won't be a need for it.
Right.
Which is really interesting. But the whole series is amazing, because you don't have to pay to enter the series. So if you're good enough, which obviously means you will have had to make a significant investment in your career prior to that. But if you're good enough, the seat is funded, it's sponsored, and it's single seaters, and they have some really cool people kind of behind the scenes, like former F1 drivers like David Coulthard, who are sort of on the management sort of side of things as well. So I mean, and those types of things, they're coming on TV. Like, I remember I was on a plane to Dubai a couple of years ago, and I saw it on the in-flight entertainment, and that was insane. I mean, it's kind of there if you look for it, if you know what I mean.
Thanks for sharing about all of those. It's cool to see how exposure for women and exposure for the sport and the different careers in it are being developed there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you don't stop at Formula One racing. You're also a DJ. Let's hear about your career with that.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you want to know?
Like, how did you first get started with that? It seems like a really unique path, and I just want to hear how someone gets into that.
Yeah, for sure. So again, like, we're talking kind of going back 15 years. Where was electronic music at that point in time in the world? And, where was technology also at that point? And for me, I think even just before the age of 15, like, my first exposure to understanding, I think, the fundamental core of which is, how can music heal people? And that understanding is something that's the reason I am a DJ. I mean, that reason has never changed. When I DJ, it's really to move a room and to move emotions and to capture an energy and to direct it in a different way. And I think because of the bullying and stuff, like, I started learning the Spanish guitar when I was 7, and I've realized now that learning that, it actually was one of the first reasons why I got into DJing, because the music I play is very Ibiza is a very Ibiza vibe, and that has a lot of Spanish scales and gypsy sort of scales in its productions. And so I think that was when the first kind of, like, let's say, the seed was planted, but also, more importantly, kind of just escaping my educational surrounding and just kind of being in that room for an hour and learning, this incredible instrument. And then I was like, I was born in London, I grew up here, and I was a bit of a rebel, and I started going out when I was quite young. I was about 15 when I started going to clubs, and I know that I wasn't doing it for the wrong reason, because I went there, and, like, the first club I went to is a place called Fabric, which is, one of the best clubs in the world. And they literally have a sound system it's a mind body experience, because there's speakers literally on the dance floor itself, it's like underneath your feet. And
oh wow, yeah.
There's speakers around your ears and everything. So you're getting this incredible experience, right? And I just remember the first time I went to that a club, which was that club, and hearing a production on a sound system, which is like multi-million-pound sound system.
Yeah.
Like, it changed my life. It just changed my life. Like, literally just the sound of a kick drum. And I was just fascinated. But also what I was so fascinated about was, like, well, hang on a second. Like, I've just come from this really like close-minded environment. Like, I mean, the people that I was surrounded by in school were so close-minded. Like they I just thought the world was those four walls. Like, I didn't even know like that a world existed outside of that. And suddenly you get to this dance floor and there's just complete freedom and liberation and expression and friendliness. And I was just like, I was like overwhelmed, but I was just like in awe of the whole experience. And it just changed my life. And I knew right then and there, like this isn't just about experiencing music. I want to be a part of this somehow. I was collecting music obsessively already by that point because the internet had come out. I like already started downloading so many things, like even Buddha Bar, like, compilations from there. So many different just forms of electronic music. And so, yeah, I think what happened was it's not an easy, even today, how do you just become a DJ? I think today there are easier paths because the internet has allowed there to be, number one, keynote discussions, which you can just literally Google on YouTube about it. So there's so much high level thought kind of being shared, which wasn't shared, back then. DJs definitely did not have as much of a voice as they do now. But then now you have schools, so you can totally go to a DJ school. Now today, which I think is just absolutely incredible, is that DJing and music production forms, I think it's 40 or 60%, no, 40% of the GCSE music curriculum grade at studying music in school. So now the way that it was amazing. Like, that's a game changer. The way we consume music now, it's embraced that it's not just classical music when you learn music at that level. It's the fact that either of us can go on our iPhone or our Android and download a DJ app for free, and to some basic level we can mix some tunes and we can have something going in the background for our friends. So yeah, I started it, I then, it was much harder at that, that age because, A, I had to kind of sneak into clubs, but B, there wasn't that level of what we have today. So, I guess, my way into it was really becoming friends with the people that were the DJs. And I was really lucky because two people in particular, they became my best friends. And they just took me under their wings, and I just observed their environment for 3 years straight. I didn't touch the decks. I just literally watched them play. I watched them do things and just do these incredible things. And then I just decided, like, aged 18, I did a gap year before I went to uni, and I decided, like, I really want to try this. I want to try and learn this, because it's just something I really want to do. And I looked up, there was a DJ school, that existed, and I went and I learned the fundamentals. And then, but then you really learn by doing, because, 40% really is the craft. Of course you need to know how to mix. Of course you need to know the technical aspects. But if you can't read energy, if you can't, play songs that people kind of are moved by and remember you by, then it doesn't matter if you can you can make the most flawless mix in the world. Like, if the song is boring, the song is boring. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, and that's and it never stopped, because as soon as I left that school, that course, I already had offers to DJ in Mykonos. I started really, kind of trying to get opportunities to play in London, and I started getting residencies throughout my university time. So building those residencies was like crucial, because you're starting to build your fan base. You have a place to play that people can come and hear what you do, and it all just went from there. So when I left university, I was just flying. Like, I didn't have to think, like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to apply to get a job? Like, I was just managing my DJ career already, like, by the time I left uni.
Yeah. Cool. Interesting. I guess I'm curious, like, what the process looks like of getting new jobs, new gigs. Like, right now, I'd assume you're not doing anything with that. But in a normal time, are you every weekend going to an event and DJing? And how do you find those clients? Or are they seeking you out? Are you pretty well known?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a great question, because, I think it all begins with, like, knowing what you want, number one. Like, do you want to be Swedish House Mafia? Do you want that level of fame? Do you want that level of exposure? because you have to be comfortable with the fact that even if you don't want that, even if you just walk into a room, I mean, just the very nature of you walking into a room and taking control of the sound system, yeah, people are going to judge you for it, and people are going to have an opinion. And you need to know that, like, that there is now, people are so obsessed with like knowing what the person's like, that social media is a part of this process. It's very rare that you can be a DJ and truly succeed, in terms of like getting into that level of playing in the best clubs in the world, if you don't have a presence. And so I think for me, it was always like, well, I didn't really want to be at that level of Swedish House Mafia. I never wanted to sell out. I play very underground music. It's not for everyone, but there's a big scene within it in that sense. Like, and it's actually amazing to see what's developed from it, because when Swedish House Mafia put house music on the map to the world, and particularly in America, all the subgenres started getting trickled down into like those parts of the world. And so now, like, you could literally walk into like a store and it's just, you wouldn't not hear house music. I mean, it's literally everywhere, right? So the career paths in it are really interesting, because you have to also produce music. I mean, if you also want that level of success, you have to produce music, and that's a different skill set in itself. And I like to compare that sometimes from like knowing how to drive an automatic and knowing how to drive a manual. And I think
funny, yeah.
knowing how to drive an automatic, I know, is DJing production is really a manual bit. And it's so time intensive. You need to know and accept that, like, if you really want to do this for the right reasons and you really want to like hone your craft, you need to know how to like make music, and you need to study that, and you need to do that for like at least 1 or 2 years without even without like putting that out there, because you need that time for yourself to like learn it. Because as soon as you put it out there, then everyone's going to want to know, like, they want to get onto a label. You have all these other pressures that you have to manage around it, and you don't have that beauty of time to just learn and absorb, which is so important. So yeah, I think now, am I doing anything? No, like, for sure, there's no, I mean, it's a disaster here in the UK, to be honest with you. I mean, already the club culture here was at serious threat. I think in the last decade, 50% of clubs in the UK have shut down because of things like realtors and government.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a crazy statistic. It's a really crazy statistic. And so the pandemic has just obliterated
I
clubs.
bet, yeah.
We were one of the first to shut down, and we're going to be one of the last to come out, for sure. So, live streaming, obviously that's where everyone's kind of like doing their thing now, but is there money in it? Not right now. Not unless you're at the very top, at that, like, David Guetta level. It's tough. So, yeah, we got, but one day it will come back, because you can't stop, people from wanting to go out and have a good time. I mean, it's been a part of our human society.
It's so interesting. Another career that I just am completely outside of the world of, so I don't know much about. So that's really fun to hear about. And then the last big topic I want to cover is that TED Talk. How did that opportunity come to you?
Yeah, for sure. It was an interesting one, because I never really thought about it. Like sometimes when afterwards when it happened, people were like, oh my God, like, how did that happen? Like, that's like, I want to do that before I'm the age of 30 or whatever. And it was all a very organic and natural opportunity. And I happened to go to Luxembourg for a gig, and there was a lady there I was talking to, because my best friend, she had organised the whole thing in Luxembourg for Women's Day. And this lady, she really wanted to talk to my best friend. So my best friend is quite sort of well known in Luxembourg, and people kind of queuing up to talk to her and all this. So I felt bad for this lady, and I was like, I just started talking to her, like, and she didn't tell me that she worked for TEDx. Like, she just told me that what she was doing aside from that, which she was working for the government. So it was really interesting. We were having a great chat anyway, and then she just got connected to me, and she started sort of seeing me on social media and like just seeing some of the content I share. And literally out of the blue, I got this email from her, and she just said, we have a TEDx coming up in Luxembourg in 6 weeks. and we think we would love for you to do a talk. Would you be interested? And at first I wasn't sure if this was a hoax. I was like,
Yeah.
what? Is this for real? And but it wasn't. And she put me in touch with with the main organizer, and we had a chat, and that was it. It was like it was happening, and they just they don't tell you, oh, you should speak about this. You have to come up with like the big idea, and you that idea needs to be literally one sentence. And they say that when people pitch to talk to TED, like it really has to be. They don't want the whole spiel. They just want literally one sentence.
Really? Wow. What
Yeah,
was your
yeah,
one
absolutely. Because
sentence?
it's how to rewire the brain from dyspraxia.
Oh, cool.
So the topic in itself, I mean, that idea didn't come to me until much later, because then you go through the whole emotion, like, okay, wait, I've just been trusted with this platform. I
Yeah.
haven't had to actually pitch an idea. Well, but what is my idea going to be about? Plus, there's so much I want to talk about, and there's, like, do I go on that stage as the motorsport person or the DJ? Like, which one? Am I talking about my experiences? And then I hadn't really, to be honest with you, I hadn't really been so public and vocal about dyspraxia up until my TED talk. It was just something I had, but because I never got therapy for it, because I never had that interaction beyond that one day with that educational psychologist. It was just something I just lived with, and I never really went deep into like thinking about. It was just like behind like somewhere in between my brain. I was always just dealing with it and getting better. But like then I suddenly realized when I was thinking about it, like, hang on, this is actually the thing that could actually tie it all together, because actually, like, I'm in two industries that really rely on coordination.
Yeah. For real.
And I've managed to somehow to do well in it. So how have I done that? And that's when it all just kind of started coming together. But it was an absolutely crazy experience, because I didn't get a lot of time to prepare, and so I already had work commitments, and I was in 6 countries in those 6 weeks. I was between Africa, America, Ibiza, London. I mean, it was nuts. And you can't just cancel those things, there's your work commitments, right? And I had this huge event going on for Regents Racing as well, that it was massive. Like, and I was managing the entire thing. Like, it was all on me. And I know I remember being in the DJ booth in Ibiza, and I was literally like in between breaks, I was like answering as many emails and promoting as much as I could, and I just doing so much. And this whole 6 weeks was just the biggest like journey of a lifetime. And it was like literally climbing. I knew I was standing like at the base of a very steep mountain when she told me, like, do you want to do it? Because I also had to think, do I really, I don't want to, you also know you're going to put yourself on that platform, so you don't want to embarrass yourself, because there have been, many people who have gone on that platform who've been torn to shreds, because ultimately they could also have the best speech in the world, but then they get on that stage and they just, everything freezes up, and that's it. You can't turn back from that experience. So what I started even realizing when I started doing research was that I started seeing crazy statistics, like some TED speakers have, of course, had their speech written by professional writers. Some they say is like if it's meant to be an 18-minute speech, and for every minute people spend 1 hour just practicing that 1 minute of sentence. And I was like, oh my God, I just don't have time. I don't have the time. I don't even, like, how am I even like going to write something that's such a high level of thought, with so
Yeah.
many different areas to cover, and dealing with jet lag, and I trying to write this thing in on the plane to Dubai, and it wasn't happening, like it was so tough, and it just like parts of it were coming together, but then the week before I literally just locked myself away, and I just got it done. I just wrote it, and then it was like a mad dash to kind of get it analyzed by the TED team. I mean, I'd given them a basic structure like prior, because they need to know that. They need to know like what are the four sort of main linking components, but then it's really, on you to kind of develop it. But they do want to work with you. Like they want this to be the best for you as well. So yeah, and then that was it. I had to memorize it. I think by the time the whole speech actually got ironed out and everything, I had 3 or 4 days to memorize it. On top of that, I definitely threw myself in the deep end, because the talk happened to be at the Philharmonic Hall in Luxembourg. And I was like, there's just no way I'm not doing a music performance if I'm allowed to. Like, I mean, I have to, like, this is the best way to actually demonstrate, how I've managed to overcome dyspraxia in a way. So I also had another huge thing on my plate, which was like, getting this music production ready for performance in a Philharmonic Hall. that was another, whole thing in itself. So yeah, I got to Luxembourg. Not much sleep involved in those 6 weeks.
Oh, I bet.
It was
A lot of
nuts.
nerves too.
A lot of nerves. Thank God my sister was with me, and she was my like superstar and all of that. But I met the guy who's gone on to become, now a colleague of mine and a really good friend. He was the guy who's organizing TEDx in Luxembourg. He happens to be a public speaking coach.
Oh, wow.
I know. I was really lucky, because I just had 1 hour with him before my speech. That was it.
No
Like,
way. That's
yeah,
quick.
yeah. That's it. Because I mean, if you lived in Luxembourg and you had access to him and to practice with him, but I just got to Luxembourg like the day before, and that was it. So I just had that 1 hour. He's already stressed out because he's running this huge event, so he's not like, he can't just make more time for me. Like that's the window he has. But in that 1 hour, I have to say, he just transformed my speech. And it was really like, that was when it was like brutal. Like, okay, like it's long, there are too many, because there's a music element to this as well. You need to factor in that you have to take out 5 minutes of your speech. You can't have an 18 minutes of talk, if you want the song. And I wanted the song to say, so he was like, just chop, and it hurt. It was like, oh my God, but I really need that part. Like, otherwise how are people going to understand what it's about? But it actually ended up being the best thing. But also, it also was difficult because what happens is that you obviously have to memorize things. So you're like, when he chops something, it's really hard to like remember that you're not meant to say that and be natural in your delivery as well. And then, yeah, so he really helped, like, he did that. And then the other thing that he really focused a lot on was body language, because I suppose what started happening in those 6 weeks was I was probably just freezing up inside, like from not sleeping, from being in 6 different time zones, from having so much work stress. Like I was internally freezing up without realizing it. And then the day came and when I was saying the speech, like I wasn't really moving around. And he had all these funny terminologies for these things. And he was like, walk to the side of the stage, like walk from one side of the stage to another when you've made a point. And to me in the beginning that felt so unnatural, and that's the beauty of TED, the whole point of TED is that you don't have a speech in front of you. You don't have a lectern. Nothing can cover up your body language and your movement, and that's how the authenticity gets relayed in such a big way as well. It actually made so much sense, because when I did walk, when I stopped, it allowed people to digest what I said, but it also allowed my mind to just like get into the next level of what was going to come next in the speech. So that was the experience. And I didn't sleep the night before. I just couldn't. I tried so hard. I tried so hard. I just couldn't do it. So it was even more stressful because not having slept and then being in there, it was like, I just, after the speech, I went outside and I just, like, all these people wanted to talk to you and all this and that. And I just literally walked out of the hall. And I just passed out on the bench for a good 10 minutes, and I just closed my eyes.
Yeah.
And I just let it all just absorb, and yeah. But it was the most amazing experience of my life, and it was really because of how much it pushed me. I didn't even think I was capable of doing that at that point, 6 weeks before. Like, I didn't think I could have done that. And lucky to say it all went really well. I mean, it's been picked up really well. It's definitely out there. And most importantly for me, it was that people came up to me afterwards and, since, of course, online, that they actually think they might have dyspraxia, or it's helped them in their journey of dyspraxia and understanding it, because there isn't that much resources out there, to deal with these things. So that was really, really good. And I'm part of all these forums online, with on Facebook of like, these of dyspraxia, and like a lot of parents who come on who don't know how to help their children, because it's particularly like, during school, like you're a teenager, your emotions are just running high. It's been really, really cool to kind of just be a part of that community and like kind of give back and share like some of my experiences as well. Yeah, so sorry, that was quite a long-winded, but
no, that's so cool. What an incredible opportunity. And I have to say, I think you did a really great job. I see you did a good job with expressing yourself with your body language and everything. I thought it was really, really well put together. So that was That's must have been so fun, and all the responses that have come since. And going along those lines, if you with how you talked about you have gotten the responses from different people with dyspraxia or parents that have a child with dyspraxia, what would be a message that you have for someone with dyspraxia? If you could share one tip, one advice, or just an overall message for them.
Absolutely. I think you know, your emotions are something you're going to have to manage for the rest of your life. Like, no matter who you are, but particularly with dyspraxia, there's so much going on and frustration when you can't do things. And I think that if you can understand and integrate meditation and yoga into your life every single day, it's going to be the most powerful thing you could do to help you on that journey.
Powerful. Thank you for sharing all of this. So let's get into the end of podcast questions. I enjoyed hearing your full story and getting to know you more and all that you're doing. It seems like you've got your hand in a lot of things.
Thank you, Emma. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah. So, what is the best or most recent book that you've read?
So I thought about this one because I think this book, I started reading it recently, and it's called Performance at the Limit, Business Lessons for Motor Racing. And it's written by three university professors. And I really enjoyed reading the book because it goes into a really high detailed analysis of the principles you can take from motor racing and how you can apply it to your own sort of company. So I would really recommend that book if any of what I've said has interested you and you want to know more. I think that's a fantastic book to get with.
And who or what is illuminating in your life right now?
Definitely. So I actually launched my podcast today.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you so much. It's called Mission Makers, and we released 3 episodes. You know, as a sort of thing for like the first week. And the first 3 guests I have, they're amazing, amazing people. But one in particular is my best friend Tessie, who I kind of talked about a little bit about Luxembourg and everything. And today I was kind of like listening back to her podcast because you know you do these conversations, you speak for an hour or whatever it is. I mean, I didn't sit there and go through all of the what I spoke about, you know, with like, you know, I have I'm lucky to have like a, you know, team with me right now who's working on the podcast. And I wanted them to come from that lens and say, let's just cut out this content, that content, right? So I just didn't want to like hear back the conversation. And today I listened to the conversation, and I have to say, Tessie, you know, I'm always in awe of her, but she's a woman that she's a woman that has just touched so many people's lives. She was a princess of Luxembourg, and people know her for that. But what people are starting to realize and know and really love about her is her relentless dedication to humanity. And she's been through a very, very tough separation from the royal family of Luxembourg. And a lot of people have judged her for that publicly and have criticized her. And it's very easy to judge and criticize someone when you don't know them and you just see, you know, you see a fairy tale life and you see it kind of falling apart. And in many ways, she really reminds me of like Princess Diana and what she went through. And knowing Tessie so well, just, you know, she's just so philanthropic and so like just the conversation she had with me on that show, on that episode, were amazing insights into who she is as a person and what she really cares about. So she's really inspiring me. And she asked me a really interesting question once when I was on her podcast, which was that who are your idols? Like, you know, who did you grow up idolizing? And it's actually a question I've thought about a lot because as I've been on this journey of, you know, of music and motorsport, and of course, you know, particularly with music, you're exposed to a lot of famous people. And when you actually meet those people, you know, you could have idolized them for ages, you know, like in your room or, you know, in your bedroom, you had a poster or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 10 years. And you're led to believe that person is what they obviously have portrayed themselves as in the media. But when you actually meet some of those people, and like I've just had some experiences where I'm just shocked, you know, at the person who I thought, you know, grew up and admiring is not the values I hold to myself. Like no freaking way. So when Tessie asked me that question, I realized that my idols are the people that are actually in my life who I know really, really well, who I know what their values and their behaviors are, and
Yeah, I
whether
like
that's
that.
whether that's your mom, your dad, your family, or your best friend. Those are my heroes, and those are the people that illuminate me.
Oh, I love that. And I'll have to give your podcast a listen. Congrats
Yeah,
on
100%.
launching. That's so fun.
Thank you.
What is an organization that you would like to illuminate?
Well, because I haven't worked in Formula One yet, I have to say I would just absolutely at some point in my life love to work for Formula One. Like, it would just be a dream.
Not surprising. I love it. So, to finish it off, what is your one message to send to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we all have our limits. Nobody is perfect. Like, we all have it. And this pandemic has really woken up people to really be grateful for what, because if you have a roof, if you have food, you just have more than most people right now in the world. And, we've been in this society that's been so consumed about getting more, getting excess. Like, so many of the world just hasn't thought about the fact that like 35% of our like animals are left in this world. We've destroyed this planet, and I just think that is so something none of us can like shy away from anymore. Like, every single decision, every brand we purchase from, everything that we recycle, everything we do is going to shape whether this planet exists or not in the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades from now. And you have to take that on your response. We all have a responsibility to it. But I also think it's also a time for us now to really think about what is seeking us in our passions, what really truly fulfills us, because we became this world that was so obsessed with globalization, becoming fast, doing everything, burning out, and working for money. And but really, what is it all about if at the end of the day you can't come home to a happy house? Yeah, what is it about? What is the point? So what does success really mean to you? How are you going to define that? Because money will only play a very small part into that. So I think that's really my closing sort of what I really would like people to take from it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Farah Nanji. If you want to find out more about what she's doing, you can find her website at dj-ninja.com. And that's where you can find links to her podcast, her speaking, about her DJ career, all that she's doing, as well as links to her social media accounts. And of course, you've got to go check out her podcast. That's the Mission Makers Podcast, where she talks to people that are involved in music, motorsport, business, and other industries to lead inspiring conversations. And if you want to continue to follow along with all that the Illuminate podcast is doing, you can find us on Twitter at Illuminate_pod or on Instagram at the Illuminate podcast. We love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on the show. All right, everyone, that's all I have for this week. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my conversation with Farah. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.